So the first one is I see a lot of the corporate Democrats traveling back and forth across the country to their fundraisers on private jets. How do you get from place to place?
Well, I do fly commercial, sometimes that middle seat and, where the common people are. And I do a lot of driving, and I stay mostly in people's homes. Occasionally we got to get a, motel room. And I go by myself most of the time. And just like most people get around, it's nothing special.
All right. So I know it's early in the race, but so far with the Greens, it seems to be like a two-person race between you and I think his name is Dario Hunter. Mm-hmm. Is that right? What separates you from him?
Well, I've been at this in the Green Party from the beginning, and my commitment has been proven, for the long haul. I think I have put out a program that deals with the life and death issues we're facing. The climate crisis, inequality, and inequality kills. We have a 20-year life expectancy gap between our richest and poorest counties in this country. And the nuclear arms race, which nobody's been talking about. And my campaign's about building and organizing the Green Party so we are able, in the 2020s, to start electing thousands of people, start getting real power in the society and making the changes we need, because the Democrats and Republicans won't do it. So I think, what's unique about my campaign is we're gonna help Greens organize, and we're gonna bring Greens together around this program. And we're gonna bring a lot of new people into the Green Party. I say the Green Party exists because we're needed. Not because we've been good organizers, but because people get frustrated. They try to, stop a war, or stop a pipeline, or get public campaign financing, or whatever the issue is, and the Democrats are the ones that stop them. And then they get mad and they say, well, I'm going to the Green Party. And we're not really ready for them, but we got to get to the position where we are. And so that's really the main objective of my campaign. I see my main role as organizer, helping people get organized and training people to get organized, or how to organize. So, that's what I'm offering.
All right. You call yourself an eco-socialist. Socialism might be the most misunderstood word in the United States. I get the impression some people might hear eco-socialism and think Stalinism with more banning of plastic straws. What does the word mean to you?
There's no democracy, or there's no democracy without socialism. In other words, economic democracy. And there's no socialism without democracy. So Stalinism wasn't socialist. The old Soviet bloc was, some people call it state capitalist, some people call it bureaucratic collectivist. The bureaucracy collectively exploited the working class. And the way it transitioned so quickly into the, gangster capitalism you see now in most of those Eastern European countries, led by the former leaders of the Communist Party, tells me it was probably state capitalist is a better description. Either way, it was an exploitative class society. And socialism is about a classless society where people get the full value of their labor. They're not exploited. So that's socialism. Now, eco-socialism, socialism in the 19th and 20th centuries was about expanding the forces of production so we end poverty. And the analysis of Marx and other socialists was that capitalist relations of production obstruct the full use of innovative new technologies. And you can argue about that, but the fact is now the problem of production has been solved, and we've got to figure out how to produce what we need to meet our basic needs within ecological limits. That's why the only kind of socialism that makes sense right now is an ecological socialism, where we choose to produce enough for everybody, but in a way that's balanced and within the limits of nature. And that's an imperative because we're in the midst of the 6th great mass extinction in the Earth's history. Others have been caused by supervolcanoes or asteroid hits. This time the asteroid is humanity, and it's particularly the capitalist system because it's a system of endless growth. Because of competition, firms got to grow. It imparts a growth dynamic to the whole system, which is killing the ecology of the planet. So we don't have any choice. We've got to create a socialist economic democracy so the people have the power to choose solar energy over fossil fuels. durable goods over planned obsolescence, electrified, principally rail transportation over gasoline-fired vehicles, which actually will get us around, trolley systems got people around cities faster and cheaper than cars do now, because all we do now is jam up the roads and sit in traffic jams. So that's what ecosocialism is about, and had nothing to do with the models of so-called socialism in the old Soviet bloc.
What is your plan to transition to a socialist society given the realities of capital flight and a corporate-controlled media feeding people propaganda against what you plan to do?
Well, until the last few years, in this country, socialism was a conversation stopper. Now it's a conversation starter. And I don't think the conversation is going to stop. And once we get into a discussion as to what's wrong with capitalism, endless growth, exploitation, the competition between firms, and ends up a competition between countries as global corporations enlist the militaries of their home countries to grab resources, markets, cheap labor, and geopolitical position around the world, that creates wars and imperialism. It's an undemocratic system. It alienates people at work because they have no say over their work process or work product. All these problems, and then the inequality problem because of exploitation. Growing inequality is capitalism's normal operation. The period post-World War II, that was a compromise with the labor by the capitalists for a lot of reasons. Also a period where we had to rebuild after the destruction of World War II, so there was an opportunity for a big expansion. But then the old problems of capitalists, crises of overproduction and falling profits created a stagnant situation, which we've been in ever since. We do have growth in GDP, but not growth in the real wealth people have to use and their living standards. So all those problems mean we've got to move to a socialist alternative. Now, that's the argument, I think, now that the conversation has started, that we can win. And as far as capital flight is concerned, look, we can't have socialism without international socialism. We've got to be in solidarity with the working classes and the oppressed in all countries. And socialist internationalism means we don't pick lesser evil states over greater evil states. We side with we got to have a class analysis of these societies and not play geopolitics like we're playing at Henry Kissinger. We're not a state ourselves. We should be in solidarity with, workers' movements around the world and help them get power in their countries while we get power in our countries. And then, then we'll set up, global regulations like a global wealth tax. You can't run away. You got to pay your taxes, buddy. And, the U.S. right now could do a lot to, close these tax havens because, basically we let it happen because our rich people run our government and they want a place to hide their money so they don't have to pay taxes to this government. What did Leona Helmsley, the landlord in New York years ago, say? Taxes are for little people. She was above that. Well, that's why we need new political forces in power, not the Democrats and Republicans that let this nonsense happen. So, yeah, capital flight's an issue, but there are ways of dealing with it.
It seems you draw a good bit of your ideology from the libertarian socialism and the social ecology of Murray Bookchin. Towards the end of his life, Bookchin became frustrated and gave up on electoral politics altogether. What gives you hope?
Well, Murray never gave up on electoral politics. He wanted to do it only at the municipal level. And he used to say, he had a slogan, democratize the republic and then radicalize the democracy. And what he wanted to do is have us take over cities and towns where necessary, rewrite the charters so that citizen assemblies at the base of society had the power and the elected representatives were carrying out instructions from the base, so that you had a bottom-up democracy and that you've linked these local radicalized democracies with each other against the centralized state and the giant corporations. That was his strategy. He always was for running local people. He never gave up on that. What he did change was he was trying to get the anarchists to adopt this. And, after many years of trying, he decided the anarchists are not really anarchists like the old ones from the 19th century through the Spanish Civil War, who were left-wing socialists, anti-authoritarian socialists. The anarchist movement here were mostly individualistic, self-indulgent, basically petty bourgeois people. And Murray felt very class conscious around those kind of forces because he came from the working class. And he finally said, you know, the anarchists had a good ideology, but the term is obsolete. So he went back to calling himself a libertarian socialist or a communalist. And within that framework, he talked about, libertarian municipalism, a strategy of having local elections, change city charters, citizen assemblies, and then use that grassroots power as a counterpower to the state and the corporations. And I studied with him and worked with him for a decade in Vermont. When he retired from his, he was teaching down in Ramapo, New Jersey, and living in New York City. He came up to Vermont in the 80s, and we worked very closely together until I had to move for a job in Syracuse, New York in '91. So I'm very familiar with this stuff. We didn't agree on everything. I would tell him, man, you know, we want to run local candidates in New York. We got to run somebody for governor to get a ballot line. And he said, no, just go out and petition every time. But that was not a viable way to organize, you know, given what we had. So we had our differences, but his basic points, I think, are right. You know, that when the Greens talk about grassroots democracy, it should mean citizen assemblies, like the town meetings in New England, they're basically face-to-face legislative bodies, who then elect the executive branch, in the case of New England town meetings, boards of aldermen, to carry out the decisions of the assembly. So the town meeting meets once a year at least, and it adopts a budget, passes resolutions, and if it needs be, it can have a special meeting over the course of the year. And they also elect the board of aldermen to carry out the decisions of the town meeting. Those were the cradles of the American Revolution, you know, town meetings. They were, you know, indigenous to New England, developed over the, you know, 1600s, 1700s. And then it spread, you know, all the way down to South Carolina during the Revolution. And the other thing that happened was not just property owners, but the working class, the artisans, the laborers, they started coming to town meeting. And there was a class struggle over how inclusive we'll be in our government. So that's the part of the American Revolution that we need to pick up on, you know, the town meeting tradition. And so Murray used to talk a lot about that. He did a lot of research on the American Revolution as part of this study of libertarian municipalism. So when I first met Murray, he said, we're building this anarchist confederation. I said, I don't know about it. I know those anarchists. I'm a libertarian socialist. And it's ironic, even with our differences, he started calling himself that at the end of his life.
So you had a big influence, or some influence on Murray then?
I don't know if I influenced him or taught him anything, really. He was very, you know, I learned a lot from him. I think he just came to the same conclusion on terminology that I did a little bit later. It took him longer to give up on those folks. I kind of saw it right at the beginning. That these are not left-wing socialists. They are, most of the anarchists of that era were self-indulgent individualists. And Murray actually knew that. He had the old socialists, left-wing socialism. Yeah, and particularly the Spanish Revolution.
Gotcha. Your book, Independent Politics, makes a strong case against Greens running weak campaigns, the so-called safe state strategy. Can you explain that book a little bit and your strategy for how to run campaigns?
Well, in the aftermath of 2000, when a lot of Democrats and liberals blamed Ralph Nader for the election of George Bush, which wasn't even factually true. Gore actually won Florida. The media went back and counted all the ballots. By every criteria, Gore won the state of Florida. But Nader could have been the margin of difference, that's true. So in reaction to that, Nader kind of got pushed away by some Green leaders, and they came up with this idea that we will only run for president in the states where it's clear the Democrats or Republicans are going to win, and so what votes we get won't affect the outcome. And then in the battleground states, there were two versions of it. One is we don't go there, and the other one is if I'm a candidate, I'm going to prioritize it, but if they ask me to come, I'll go there. In any case, I don't think it was taking ourselves seriously enough. You know, if we don't think people should vote for us, don't even bother running for president. Now, I believe if we're going to have a left in this country, it's got to have its own voice, its own identity, its own political party. Because when the left goes into the Democratic Party, it disappears. Socialism disappeared in this country from the 30s until it kind of got revived with the 2016 election of Bernie Sanders, and I think partly because of the socialist baiting that, you know, the far right did of Barack Obama, who was no socialist. Bernie arguably not a socialist. He doesn't talk about socializing the means of production. He says tax the capitalist system to provide some social programs, which are good programs, but politically that's not sustainable because the billionaire class he talks about will take their concentrated economic power, translate it into concentrated political power, and either block those programs or roll them back if we are able to get them passed. So, we need a socialist political identity that is independent of the Democrats. And that's what that book, is basically saying. It wasn't so socialistic, it was just saying the left needs its own identity. So the book is a compendium of people arguing for and against the safe state strategy. Nader represented the independent politics. David Cobb represented the safe states. So the whole debate during 2004 period is covered in that book. And I wrote an introduction trying to put it in context. And for me, it was, the working class needs its own party. If we depend on the professional class and the rich business classes to represent us, they're not going to represent us. And we've known that since the democratic revolutions in 1848 that spread across Europe into Latin America and Canada. And those professionals and business classes sold out the working class when they got the vote. They were in coalition against the landed elite saying, we want the franchise. And so the landed elite split the opposition by giving it to the business and professional classes, along with some economic reforms they wanted. And later, those classes said later for the working class. So the working class concluded, we need our own labor parties, our own socialist parties. And that's a lesson that is like Socialist Politics 101, first principle. And we've lost it in this country. People call themselves socialists say, it's just a tactical question whether you go in or out of the Democratic Party. That's not the socialist tradition. The socialist tradition is we're not in a capitalist party. We have our own party. And I think, that's a major thing that in this campaign, we're not only speaking to the Greens, we're speaking to the socialists who have lost their way. They aren't talking about social ownership and democratic administration of the economy, which is the core of the socialist program. And they're not talking about class independence in politics. Independent political action is Socialist Politics 101. So I think we have something to say to people that are identifying as socialists. Like this is what the socialist tradition is about.
I had one more question. You've kind of touched on it already. Why should the Green Party exist as opposed to being just absorbed by the Democrats and trying to change things from the inside?
Oh, you go inside, and that's where you die as an alternative. We call it the graveyard of the social movements. That's the Democratic Party. It goes back to the populists. When he cross-endorsed William Jennings Bryan, that was the end of the People's Party. And then the socialist movement, the communists in 1936, their popular front against fascism, they said, we're going in with the New Deal Democrats and the liberal capitalists against the fascists. Maybe it was a temporary crisis that might have made sense in some countries, but they never left. And then the Socialist Party, which had stayed independent, by the 50s, we're talking realignment. We're going to push the Dixiecrats out of the Democratic Party, they'll go in the Republican Party, and that'll be the reactionary party, and we'll be this liberal, progressive, social democratic party. And they got the realignment, but the Democrats moved right. With the Dixiecrats moved in the Republican Party, the Democrats started competing for the middle. So the old New Deal Democrats, who were progressive and liberal, the Democrats became New Democrats, corporate Democrats, so in the 70s on. So the Democratic Party moved to the right with its realignment strategy. And my argument would be that's because there wasn't a left, an independent left. If without that, the Democratic leaders, the politicians, they take voters to their left for granted because we have nowhere to go, and they listen to their donors, not their voters. The base of the Democratic Party is way to the left of the politicians. And the politicians listen to that money. That's why the Green Party can pick up a lot of those voters, because we're progressives and we're not in it for the money. We're in it for the issues.
Howie, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.